Hey, fifth grade. So remember that Esperanza Rising is a historical fiction book. So that means that although the characters are made up, the setting and a lot of things that happen in Esperanza Rising are real things that happen. Okay, so this article about the Mexican Revolution is really important to understanding the story. I want you to make sure you have a piece of paper or a whiteboard that you're annotating on so you can pause and make sure that you're understanding what we're reading. So if you need to pause the video, go ahead, pause it, grab your materials, and then you can come back and read with me. Esperanza Rising and the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920. Mexico had two major revolutions. The first one lasted from 1810 to 1820. The second one lasted from 1910 to 1920. Prior to 1517, that means before 1517, the inhabitants of Mexico did what pretty much every early civilization did. They worked to live and support themselves and spent a lot of time fighting among themselves. In 1517, the Spaniards arrived. Spaniards are from Spain, so people from Spain came to Mexico. The Spaniards were able to conquer the natives fairly easily because they convinced tribes to become their allies and fight against other tribes. Then the Spanish conquered the weakened tribes. Remember, conquered means like to take over. The Spaniards ruled for the next 300 years. Those of Spanish descent ruled. Those of Spanish descent means people that came from their ancestors were from Spain. So for 300 years, people from Spain or people who were born from people who were from Spain ruled in Mexico. Those of mixed blood, Spanish and native, were next in the power hierarchy. The native population was lowest in rank and power. So that means people from Mexico were the poorest and had the least amount of power. People that were from Spain or had Spanish blood in them had the most power and the most money. This meant that the land that had originally belonged to the natives in Mexico now belonged to the Spanish. It also meant that the natives ended up having to work for the rich Spanish landowners. The Spaniards were not effective rulers. They devastated the native population and the land. The mixed blood residents, those who had both Spanish blood and native blood in them, called the mestizos, rose up and broke from Spain in a revolution that lasted from 1810 to 1820. Okay, so a revolution is when people fight back against the rulers. So these people that were mixed between native Mexican blood and Spanish blood fought back against the rulers from Spain. For the next 100 years, things didn't get a whole lot better. The very rich held all the power, and everyone else was very poor. There was a lot of fighting to see who would be in charge. No one was happy. As we switch pages, a quick reminder to make sure you're pausing the video and making annotations while you need to. In 1910, things came to a head, and the non-landowners, known as rebels, rose up and demanded more equal sharing of resources and power. Okay, so people who did not own land, the poor people, tried to rise up and fight. It was a bloody and complex conflict in which more than 900,000 people lost their lives. The revolution began with a call to arms to overthrow the dictator, Porfirio Diaz-Morí, who had been in power for 34 years. And this is a picture of the rebel soldiers, so poor soldiers who did not own any land. Diaz was an ambitious president who wanted to modernize Mexico at the expense and suffering of its farm workers, laborers, and peasants. Okay, so at the expense of these people means that he did not care what happened to these people. He just wanted to make Mexico as a whole be more modern. He ruled by bullying and intimidation. He crushed many civil liberties. For example, there was no freedom of the press while he ruled. But the greatest injustices came in the form of new laws about land ownership. In an attempt to strengthen his ties with the United States and other influential world leaders, Diaz gave land that had belonged to the people of Mexico to foreigners. In addition, he made a rule that no Mexican was able to own land unless they had a formal legal title. Small farmers were rendered utterly helpless, so they revolted. So what they're saying right here is that Diaz gave land to people in other countries. And some of this land belonged to people in Mexico that already lived there, and the land had been passed down to them, but they didn't have a deed or they didn't have a title that said that they owned it. So they revolted. So these people that got their land taken away rose up and tried to fight against Diaz and the government. The revolution ended in 1920 when Diaz fled Mexico. There were a series of rulers after he left. Power changed hands rapidly, mostly as a result of violence or assassination. At the end, General Obregón was elected president. This is roughly where we come in at the beginning of Esperanza Rising. The revolution is over, but there's still lots of bandits running around, and here and there are many bad feelings towards landowners. So if we look down at the bottom, it tells us bandits were Mexican rebels who fought against the landowners because they felt that the land rightfully belonged to people of native Mexican descent and to the people who worked on the farms. We are going to hear bandits in our story this week a lot. So if you are confused about any of these definitions or anything that was in this article, please come to my office hours or call me at 615-739-0211. Now that you've finished reading and annotating, you can go click on the homework assignment on Google Classroom and answer the questions on the form. Good luck!